A very good morning to one and all present here. I'm Adila Mohsin, and today I would like to welcome you to the next lecture of our lecture series of the December session. And today, allow me to introduce our resource person for today's lecture. We have with us Miss Moulshree Saxena, ma'am. She cleared her NET with JRF in 2020, and she is currently a research scholar in I.E.H.E. She is also an alumnus of I.E.H.E. and I believe she did both her BA honors and her MA from I.E.H.E. So I welcome you, ma'am. We're extremely pleased to have you here because ma'am is a very known face in the department. If you uh, look carefully enough, you'll always find ma'am in every few days. So she's I should say, an indispensable part of the Department of English.
Thank you so much, Adila, for such a kind introduction. You're very sweet. And yes, I think we can begin with the lecture. We can start studying together. As we all know, today we're going to study the theater of cruelty, as mentioned in the poster. Before we begin, I have only one request that we try to be very interactive. We are open to all the questions. So ask any questions as they come. You can raise your hand. You can use the raise your hand tool on your dashboard. And whenever I prompt you to read something from this screen, you're more than welcome to volunteer for the same. All right. Let's begin. All right. So before we go, it's very important that we first talk about our very first impression of the phrase "the theater of cruelty." Right now, we have on paper officially we have no knowledge of what the theater of cruelty is. So, what do you think it means? What do you think it talks about? Anybody? Do you think it's about aggression? Do you think it's about violence?
Ma'am, if I'm not wrong, I'm not sure, but I think it was something about, oh, a lot of expressions when in the drama.
Yes, absolutely. A lot of expression, a lot of loudness. We can also deduce that since it talks about the theater of cruelty, it feels like it's a movement and it has some sociological angle to it. Let's see what it is like. Before we begin, I want you to imagine that you're at a play. I'm sure most of you spend your evenings watching a play, or you must have watched at least one play in your lifetime. So imagine you're sitting at a play as an audience member, and you're watching the actors on the stage, and the actors, they're just not performing, they're attacking you. All right, the light that is there on the stage, it's so bright that it burns your retina, it stings your retina, it stings your eye. The sound is so explosive, it's so loud that you begin to feel like you're going to have a migraine. And the movement on the stage, it feels very, it feels too daunting. It feels like the actors are crawling on your skin, and it feels like they're making you very uncomfortable. So the play is no longer just a something that is happening on the stage. The theater is happening within you. The theater is happening on your skin. You are no longer an observer, you are a part of it. What happens then? What becomes of you? This is a question that has like the people, the founders and the people who practiced theater during that time when this movement came out, they were very much concerned with these questions. And they also thought about what happens when the boundaries between a performer and the spectator collapse. What happens when the performance pushes you into a very uncomfortable space. It pushes you out of your comfort zone, and it forces you to confront the rawest parts of your psyche. What happens then? maybe you are forced to confront the conflicts that are happening within yourself as an individual. Maybe not. Let's see. Let's talk about the theater of cruelty's origin. We had a French actor, poet, dramatist, and theorist, Antonin Artaud, who founded this school of practice of theater. Now, Antonin Artaud was a Frenchman, so the French people pronounce his name like Antona Artaud. But since you're English speaker, a speaker of the English language, you can use either of the pronunciation, either Antonin Artaud or Antona Artaud. He founded this school, and he was inspired by this dance of Balinese performers that he watched in 1931. He realized that the dance that was happening on the stage, it had such loud gestures, such loud movements, that it felt as if there was something happening within himself as a spectator, as an audience member. He felt like he was no longer watching the play for the sake of watching the performance, the dance performance, for the sake of entertainment, but something more monumental was happening within himself. So he watched this dance, this performance in 1931, and 7 years later, in 1938, he came up with this work that is called The Theatre and Its Double. And it is a collection of his essays and manifestos, essentially, where he talks about what the theatre of cruelty encompasses. Now, a very interesting fact about Antonin Artaud is that he was a theatre practitioner, he was a dramatist, but his plays were not commercially successful. His theories were more prominent, and that is something very interesting about anybody who claims to be from performing arts, but he talks more about theories and they become more prominent. His theories also during his lifetime were not very known, were not very popular. Of course, he participated in seminars, he was constantly a part of the contemporary dialogue in theatre, but he was never as famous as he became posthumously. All right. In his work, The Theatre and Its Double in 1938, he talks about what theatre truly is. He makes a very wonderful statement. Would anybody want to read the statement that is there on your screen? Anybody would like to volunteer? Yeah, Srijan.
The
Yeah, Adila or Srijan, anybody can go ahead. Anybody.
Okay, then I'll go with it. The theater, which is no thing, but makes use of everything: gestures, sounds, words, screens, light, darkness. Rediscovers itself at precisely the point where the mind requires a language to express its manifestations.
Thank you so much, Srijan. So Antonin Artaud makes this really strong statement, and which is also a very important observation, that the theatre, which is in no one thing, but it makes use of everything. So everything that is present physically and emotionally, the gestures, the sound that is the recorded music or the live music or the background score, anything that is being played, the loud gestures, the grotesque gestures, facial expressions, bodily expressions, the words, of course, the dialogues, the hushes, the whispers, the loud screams, the light, that is the forelight, the backlight, the fade ins, the fade outs, the darkness. It makes use of everything that theater has to offer in order to push the audience to that point where it feels as if one needs a new language to express what is going on. In easier word, what he means is that theater is something that goes beyond the text. He was more concerned about talking about a certain kind of performing arts that just does not stick to the script. That is not just about the verbal delivery of dialogues. That is something that goes beyond the text. Now, this theory, this statement, this idea of meaning beyond the text, it was not just limited to drama, it also spills into various other genres of art like music and literature. We have think about your favorite song, think about your favorite music. If it has words, if it has lyrics, it does not essentially talks about what the words are conveying, but there must also be a certain implied meaning to it. The theory that we have at hand, reader response theory, that also stems from this very school of thought, right? So he talked about theater beyond text. Antonin Artaud always thought that theater in theater, text and dialogue are not the only means of communication. All the elements that we talked about, that we saw in his statement, the physical factors like the expressions, the gestures, the sounds, the lights, all of these come together to convey the meaning, and not just to convey the meaning, that is not their only purpose, but they also impart a certain kind of cathartic experience to the audience. All right, so it the experience, the audience's experience of watching the play is supposed to be a life changing moment for them. All right, and for this they necessarily make use of the technique that is called improvisation. Does anybody know what improvisation is in theater, in drama? Anybody?
No, ma'am, not
Okay.
sure.
So improvisation is nothing. It is just what you do in day-to-day life. That is, yes, Srijan said on-spot changes in the scene. Very good, Srijan. On-spot changes is one part of improvisation. When you're building a play, in our head, what we think how a play takes place, how a play is how it comes to existence is that somebody writes the script and then the actors read out the script, they learn their dialogues, and then they perform the scene. That was the case in ancient times. All right. But when this theater beyond text and when the modernist approaches came to be, the technique of improvisation became more prominent. Now, in improvisation, the actors know what the plot is going to be like, what the scene is going to be like. They know what the plot is. They know the scene is supposed to start at one point and the scene is supposed to end at another point. So they know the end point and the starting point. They know the story. They know the plot. They step into the shoes of the characters that they're supposed to play. They behave like the characters, they talk like the characters, and then they try to fulfill the purpose of the plot by talking with each other. This goes on for several minutes, for several hours. They try to recreate the scene, they know the story in their head, and then they try to do their best. Once they're done with this technique, once they're done playing the scene, they put on the hats, their actor hats, they take off their character shoes, they sit back, and then they pick out the dialogues that fulfill the purpose of the scene during their improvisations, the dialogues that they had come across, and they leave out the dialogues that do not align with the scene. And this is how improvisation takes place. In improvisation is it is essential in the making of any play. In folk theater in India especially, improvisation is a very prominent technique. Like nowhere in folk theater would you see that people are learning the dialogues from the script. They're they're memorizing all the dialogues, they're running across with a paper in their hand on the stage. That does not happen in folk theater. In modern theater as well, improvisation became very important. Now, Artaud believed that civilization turned humans into sick and repressed creatures. Civilization expects you to behave a certain way. The technological, the industrial expansion expects you to have a certain kind of lifestyle, and so your very primitive thoughts, your primitive tendencies are repressed. All right, they're they either your concerns, your emotions, they're piled up in the corner of the back of your mind, and either you do not have the time to confront them, or you do not have the courage to address them, to deal with them, and so you become uh, like a shadow of somebody who you used to be. You become a shell of a person. So Antonin believed that civilization does this very sick work of repressing one's own thoughts, one's own being, and so assaulting the audience's senses with movements and light and sound. It helps them separate from their repression. So the grotesque movements, the loud movements, the grotesque movements happening on the stage, it liberates them from the shackles of the strictness of the culture. And you can finally sit down and be so moved with the performance that is happening on the stage that you feel like there are certain truths happening within yourself that you need to address, that you need to be face to face with. That is a very psychological play that Antonin Artaud expected out of his audience member, but it also became very famous during his time, and a lot of his contemporaries and a lot of theater practitioners that came after him, they sought to perform something that resonated with theater of cruelty. In the one of these sessions, one of these upcoming sessions, we would also talk about the theater of the absurd and how it resonated so well, it aligned so well in principle, in theory, with the theater of cruelty. Now let's talk about, before we begin, all right, before we move forward, a scholar that talked about Antonin Artaud's theater of cruelty, Nathan Gorlick, had something to say about what cruelty actually meant. We know the techniques, we know what happens, but why the word cruelty? So a statement is there on your screen. I would request anybody to volunteer and read this statement out for our friends in the session. Anybody who would like to read this out? Yeah, Pramiti, go ahead.
Cruelty is, more profoundly, the unrelenting agitation of a life that has become unnecessary, lazy, or removed from a compelling force. The theater of cruelty gives expression to everything that is a crime, love, war, or madness in order to get unforgettably root within us the ideas of perpetual conflict, a spasm in which life is continually lacerated, in which everything in creation rises up and asserts itself against our appointed rank.
Very good. Thank you so much, Pramiti. So, what Nathan meant by this is that the cruelty is not about a certain kind of violence. It is about the cruelty of expression. The everything that we have to express, that is crime, love, war, or madness, we often tend to ignore that. So we need to be face to face with our needs to express. The theater of cruelty forces you to confront all of that is happening within yourself by a performance that is so daunting, that is so moving, that you feel as if you are not an individual entity existing in a society, but somebody who does not have a form yet. So that you can say that that is a very there is a very agitating experience, and there are certain, like, think about catharsis, experiencing catharsis whenever you're watching a movie. I'm not sure if any of you have experienced catharsis during a play, but I'm sure you must have shed tears during watching some movie. So when you're feeling that, there are characters experiencing pain, agitation, anger, struggle, or even happiness on the screen, and you relate to their pain. Even if you cannot relate to their pain, you feel like there is something happening deep within you that you have not dealt with in a long time, and so you start to shed tears. If not shedding tears, then you become a bit emotional, and you are so moved by that scene, by the story, by the character, by the dialogues, that you remember that that scene is etched in your mind forever. So that is one part of cruelty that Nathan Gorlick tried to explain in this book. Now let's talk about the characteristics of the theatre of cruelty. We know what it encompasses. There are certain key features of this practice. Now, one thing that is very important to remember at this point is that these characteristics are not defining, they're not definite, in the sense that one play may have characteristic number 1 and 2, but it might not have the third feature or the fourth characteristic. So these are not definite. These are just what one observes in a general play belonging to the theatre of cruelty. Very important part is that the theatre of cruelty plays have open expression as opposed to Brecht and epic theatre. Now, open expression means there is no reservedness, there's no subtleness to that, there's no subtlety of expression. The expression, the physical expression, bodily movements, facial expressions, they are very loud. All right. This is to this was done in order to engulf the audience into one experience, to provide the audience with an immersive experience. Now, in Brechtian theatre and in epic theatre, there was a concern that was called critical detachment, wherein there was a suspension of belief, and the audience members were supposed to watch the play from a critical point of view, from an alienating standpoint, from a detachment point of view, so that they can easily make critical deductions about themselves, about their society, and they're not overly emotional as an audience member. But in the theatre of cruelty, open expression, being emotionally involved, is a key requirement. So this theatre stands in contrast to the principles of epic theatre, the principles of Brechtian theatre. Audience engagement is, of course, it is a key feature. It was the very central to performance, that the audience members were supposed to be engaged. Now, what happens in realist dramas that plays that are play with the theme of realism, is that there are subtle dialogues, there are subtle gestures, subtle movements on the stage, and so the front row and the second row may be immersed in it, but the third row and somebody who's sitting at the very back of the auditorium might not be too much into the play. But in theatre of cruelty, because there is so much loudness, the assault on all your senses is so prominent that you cannot look away from the stage. You are supposed to keep your eyes dotted at the stage at all times, and that happens especially in stylized plays, where you see that it talks, when the play is about a certain age, a certain point in time in history, when it is a period drama, especially then you're so overwhelmed by their costumes, by the property, by the stage setup, that you are just constantly paying attention to what is happening on the stage at all times. And even if you're not, the actors make sure that you are constantly looking at them by performing, by delivering a loud performance. Another important feature, as we discussed, is there is less emphasis on the text, because this school is about it talks about theater that goes beyond the text. The cruelty that we talked about and the statement that we saw by Nathan Gorlick, the cruelty here is not about violence, it's not about aggression, it's certainly not about portraying any malpractice happening in society. It is about the cruelty to language, cruelty to concepts, cruelty to ideas, cruelty to representations. That means that there are no filters, there are no appropriate registers. One does not think while coming up with a play that belongs to the theater of cruelty. One does not think if this is audience appropriate, or this is age appropriate or not. No, they are very cruel in their delivery of ideas, delivery of language, and their representations, in their ideals. And so the text only becomes an outline, a blueprint of what is supposed to happen on stage, and the play becomes more about the performance and more about what is happening in the minds of the audience members. Cruelty of language, concepts, ideas, and representations. Gestures and movements, we have discussed this at length, that gestures and movements are very central to this movement, because the audience engagement needs to be there, and so they try to assault the senses of the audience. Now pay attention to how I keep saying assaulting the senses. I can just say that the plays appeal to the senses, but it is not merely an appeal. It is an assault, in the sense that whenever you're watching a play that belongs to this movement, you're very evidently uncomfortable. You feel as if you cannot go ahead with this experience anymore, but you're supposed to have that discipline with yourself, that because at that time that was the decorum, that you're not supposed to walk out on plays. And so after being in that space of discomfort for a considerable amount of time, when you reach the conclusion of the play, you feel as if a conflict has been resolved within yourself along with the play that is happening on stage. Another important feature, another important characteristic is there is no emphasis on individual performance. So no critic is going to judge your acting when you're performing a play from the theater of cruelty. It is not a test of your acting, what your stage presence is like, how well you can carry a costume, what your property is like, what the stage setup is like. No, the emphasis is not on the individual performance, which stands in contrast to the ideas of Stanislavski and realism. Stanislavski was a Russian dramatist and theorist, and for actors, he's supposed to be like a god, because he gave a lot of techniques, a lot of ideas in acting. So this stands in, and they were, because these were contemporary ideas, so this movement stands in contrast to its own contemporary movements. Realism also, if you're familiar with the works of Henrik Ibsen, he was a realist, so he performed realist dramas. All right. So it was, again, because in realism, we have people who can act well. We have actors who can deliver a performance so wonderfully that you believe them, that yes, these two people on stage are husband and wife. In the theater of cruelty, that is not a concern. That is just not what they're concerned with. They're more concerned with delivering a loud performance, something that is very uncomfortable and memorable, and helps the audience members to have an emotional, cathartic experience. Talking about the techniques in the theatre of cruelty, much of it was already covered in the characteristics part. But if we talk about the techniques, signs are very important in the theatre of cruelty, that are the facial expressions, the grotesque gestures, and movements. Signs are basically the key identifiers of this play. If you watch any play, if you watch a play happening in our city, if you're watching a play happening in Bhopal, in Bharat Bhavan, and if you see that the gestures are very loud, very grotesque, if you see a stylized play, you would just know that it aligns with the ideas of this movement. Now, actors perform in a physical space that is around the audience in this movement. So, in a traditional setup, what happens is that the stage is in front of you and the audience is here. So, there is a 2D kind of dynamic. But in theatre of cruelty, this does not happen all the time, but this was a really popular practice, a really popular technique, that the audience members sat in the middle, in the center, and the actors performed around them. So the play was happening all around them, and it felt as if because of course as an audience you would be unsure where to look. Sometimes the scene is happening in front of you, sometimes it's happening at the back, so you might be a bit confused. But that is one of the techniques that these people used to overwhelm the senses of the audience, because you're not supposed to be entertained by this. Theater is not supposed to be a mode of entertainment in this movement. And sensory details, of course, because there is going to be an assault to your senses essentially. So yeah, the sound, the light, the stage setup, that is, all of these things are going to play with your senses. You're going to feel as if you're going to have a headache. You're going to feel as if you're going to lose your sleep, because the light is so bright, so vibrant. There was a play by, I think, Peter Weiss, and it was called Said or Marat. We'll talk about this in the upcoming slides. In that play, it talks about people who are not not mentally well; they're unwell, and so for one particular production, Peter Weiss actually brought up actual lunatics on the stage, and so the audience could not figure out if these people are actual lunatics or they're just actors, they're just people who are playing a part. So that was a really wonderful experience and a wonderful experiment in this movement. Antonin Artaud, in his book The Theatre and Its Double, he talked about he had certain manifestos that we are supposed to, as theatre of cruelty, we're supposed to do this, we're not supposed to do this. So there are certain manifestos here, and we have lifted some lines from the first manifesto in order to understand what he meant by the theatre of cruelty. Would anybody like to volunteer to read this? Adila, go ahead.
We do not intend to do away with dialogue, but to give words something of the significance they have in dreams.
Something of the significance they have in dreams. Dreams are not real. Dreams take you to a place that is very fantasy-like. It can be sweet, it can be bitter. It is certainly not confined within the rationality of reality. And so that was his motive as well. As a person, as a practitioner of the theatre of cruelty, he said that we are not concerned with the text, but we're not saying that we're going to do away with dialogue, but we're going to give words a certain kind of dreamlike significance that feels as if the words are magical, yes, but they're also overwhelming. Can you think of anybody from literature or from any other field who also talked about dreams in such a way? Any important theorist?
Ma'am, I think Freud, if I'm not wrong.
Yes, Sigmund Freud. He had his book, The Interpretation of Dreams, where he put forth the theory of psychoanalysis. So, if you ever go to, if you ever like, yeah, even if you're skim reading Interpretation of Dreams, you would see that he's also fascinated by the relationship that people have with their dreams and how they try to mystify their dreams, but they're just a reflection of what they're suppressing within themselves, the idea of id, ego, and superego. So the repression goes very skin deep. And that repression was also a concern of Antonin Artaud here. You remember in the initial slides, he talks about how civilization has turned people into sick and repressed creatures. So that is one of his fascinations as well. We have another statement by Antonin Artaud from his first manifesto. Would anybody like to read this? Anybody? Adila, go ahead. And Fatma Khan. Fatma can go ahead now.
Yes, ma'am, sure. We intend to do away with the stage and auditorium, replacing them by a kind of single undivided locale without any partitions of any kind, and this will become the very scene of the action.
Thank you so much, Fatima. So, it is pretty evident that Antonin was uh, uh, he was very concerned with challenging the conventions of traditional theater. Right? In traditional theater, there is an auditorium, there's a stage, there is a space for audience, there's the spectacle and the spectators. But he felt as if we are going to have this really undivided space where the boundaries between the performers and the spectators disappear. You just do not know where the audience space ends and where the performance begins. Because by manipulating these physical factors, he wanted to he wanted to make sure that the delivery of the emotional experience in audience members was perfect. All right. We have another statement from the very first manifesto. Can anybody read this? Adila, go ahead.
There can be no sorry ma'am, there can be no spectacle without an element of cruelty as the basis of every show.
So, creating a spectacle was his purpose. Not just putting up a performance, not just putting up a play as a way of for people to spend their evening. That was not his idea. That was never his purpose of being a dramatist. He wanted to put up a spectacle so huge, so massive, that the element of cruelty became an inherent part of it. The uncomfortable part of it, the assault part of it, the cruel, violent, emotional part of it was his identity, the identity of the spectacle that he wanted to offer. Now, see, Antonin Artaud was not the only person to talk about theater beyond text. In fact, his contemporaries were also talking about this. He was one of the first people to talk about this because this theory developed in the 1930s. And it was not very popular when he was alive, but it gained traction once he passed away. And that is very unfortunate, but also kind of humorous. But his contemporaries were already practicing modernist approach to theater, but this particular movement had considerable effects on the theatrical landscape of modern times. Or Jean Genet used Artaud's theory when writing the play The Balcony. The Balcony is a very good example of the theater of cruelty. If you have the time, I think parts of its scenes are uploaded on YouTube. Go have a look. Janet similarly explores themes of societal evils and madness through a theatrical lens. Then Peter Weiss's, this is the production that I was talking about, and its title is very short, as you can see. Peter Weiss's The Persecution and Assassination of Marat, as performed by the inmates of the Asylum of Charenton under the direction of the Marquis de Sade. So, this huge title is often referred to as just Marat or Sade. Marat is the person who was assassinated in the play, and Saad is the director. So this is the play that I was talking about. That during this play, actual lunatics were brought on the stage, and the audience members were not sure if this is happening for real or not. If these lunatics are actually actors or they're actual lunatics. In 19, does anybody want to say anything? I think somebody has unmuted, if I'm not wrong. Okay. In 1960s, a number of directors began to incorporate I.E.H.E's theories and staging practices in their work, including Grotowski at the Polish Laboratory Theatre. Now, Polish and Russian people, they were very open to experimenting with their theatrical techniques, and it is always a treat to read them. Even in linguistics, if you're aware, there was Prague Linguistic Circle, all of these people who were coming up with new theories. So that was something which I personally find very inspiring. The Theatre of Cruelty, the works of I.E.H.E, the theories of I.E.H.E, it also inspired Grotowski, and he practiced them at the Polish Laboratory Theatre. Just a second. In England, famed theatre director Peter Brook experimented with the Theatre of Cruelty in a series of workshops at the Royal Shakespeare Company. Now, the list of productions that Peter Brook was a part of, and the productions that were that took place under the guise of the Theatre of Cruelty, the list of those productions is available on the website of the Royal Shakespeare Company. Do check that out as well. I.E.H.E's concepts influenced playwrights like Jean-Louis Barrault, Jean Vilar, Peter Brook, Arthur Adenov, and Jacques Audiberti. All of these are important figures. So if you face any question in the exam about the Theatre of Cruelty, or the practitioners or the dramatists whose ideas, whose practices aligned with these movement, you know the answer. There was this band called the Bauhaus that named a song Antonin Artaud, and Jim Morrison from the very famous band The Doors, he tried to get his audience to experience music in a way that Artaud would approve of. So as we talked about this in the beginning, that these ideas of going beyond the text, of going beyond the physical, was not just limited to drama. It was happening in literature, it was happening in music as well. And this is one of example of one of those ideas. Charles Bukowski and Allen Ginsberg and all these poets, they were also very much influenced by the ideas of Artaud, and that's why they write such intense poetry. If you're familiar with Charles Bukowski's that particular poem, Love is a Dog from Hell, that is very vivid, and you can see that why he would be influenced by Antonin Artaud. In 2011, a group of geography and sociology professors used Theatre of Cruelty as a conceptual, experience-based technique to explore the agrarian struggle and deforestations in the Amazon basin. So you see, even though he was less, Antonin Artaud was less about the societal and the social aspect of drama and more about the technical part of drama, his ideas were used by sociologists, by people in these fields in geography and sociology, who talked about such important causes, environmental causes like the deforestation in the Amazon basin. So What I want to say is that once a good thought comes into existence, it is not limited to just one genre or one field of art or to arts alone. It expands into the totality of humanity, and that is the very identifying feature of a good idea, that it is universal. So we do not know if Theatre of Cruelty was a success, if it was popular. We do know that it was popular at that time, but we know for a fact that this was a really good idea because it had a universal appeal to it. Assaulting the senses was something that resonated with every artist, no matter their art form. This brings us to the end of our lecture. Let's revisit the lecture, what we have studied so far. This theory, this movement was developed by Antonin Artaud in the 1930s, and this movement seeks to disrupt the traditional audience-performer relationship and to engage in emotions directly. The plays that belong to this movement, they move beyond reliance on text and dialogue. There is essentially improvisation, and they prioritize sensory experience like gestures, lights, and sounds. They're very central to the performance. Artaud aimed to liberate humanity's repressed instincts by assaulting the senses and confronting audiences with raw, visceral experiences. The rawness brings a certain authenticity, yes, but it also brings forth a lot of discomfort, especially if you're an inexperienced audience member. The term cruelty does not imply physical violence, but it is about cruelty to conventional language, to ideas, and to representations. The physicality is a really important characteristic of the theatre of cruelty. There's an emphasis on movement, gestures, and facial expressions over the spoken word. And so we know that this stands in massive contrast with realism and Stanislavski's theatre. Audience involvement is central to the theatre of cruelty. There's an active audience engagement. It often places them physically at the center of the performances. There is a sensory immersion. Yes, of course, there's use of lights, sounds, and spatial arrangements to envelop audiences fully. Minimal text is used because then again, theatre beyond text, that was their purpose. So the text plays just a supplementary role. It's just there as a supporting actor with greater focus on non-verbal communication. Spatial experimentation with the space, the physical space, is always happening. And also we saw that statement by Antonin Artaud in his first manifesto, breaking down the traditional separation between stage and audience to foster intimacy and immediacy. It's there. Now there is this infographic on theatre of cruelty. I will share this infographic, these notes, these slides with Adila, and she can share these with all of you. I'll also share the PDF of Theatre and Its Double, the original work by Antonin Artaud. I have the PDF, I'll share that. And there's also an essay on absurdism and reality and cruelty. That is a very important, very, very interesting read. So you can read that as well. You can go through the Theatre and Its Double, the work, and also this infographic. This brings us to the end of the lecture. Any questions, any doubts about this? See, theatre of cruelty is it is more about the practice, yes, less about the text. So one thing that you can do if you have some free time and if you're just fascinated by the topic, you can explore this particular movement on theatre, and you can see there are some practitioners, some dramatists who have uploaded some videos on YouTube, who experimented with this form in combination to other forms. So that is something very fascinating to watch, how people are combining ideas to come up with something that is very unique, very new. Sometimes it's a very good experiment, sometimes it's a very hilarious experiment, but at the end of the day it's very fun to watch and very informative as well. So yes, any questions, any doubts about the theater of cruelty? Well, I guess no. If you have any questions, you can just drop a. I think somebody raised their hand. Yeah, go ahead. Sonal, I guess.
Yes,
Not sure.
ma'am.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, ma'am actually had a doubt. Like in the slide, we see there's like the point total theater experience. And in that, one of the points is heightened reality. If you could see.
In this infographic?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Yes.
Heightened. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. So, ma'am, like I wanted to know, like heightened reality is a part of it, but then how, like, can we have an example so that like, for me, I couldn't understand how in a heightened reality. Definitely, the intervention is there, assault of senses, but the heightened reality, I couldn't understand that, like how it is a part of it.
So, Sonal, it talks about heightened reality is about like it works on two levels. First is the physical level that let's take light or sound into consideration. Okay, let's take sound as an example. That the actors on the stage, they're just not talking while trying to deliver the scene. They're screaming, and not in a way that aligns with the idea, with the dialogue. Like if I'm I'm, for example, I'm an actor and I'm pleading to my co-actor. That is, the scene requires me to plead or to request, but I'm screaming in my request. So that feels absurd. That is not how it's supposed to happen. So you feel as if this does not align, but also the screaming part of it, that is the physical part of it, that brings your attention to the fact that when you're supposed to make a request, you're supposed to have a very calm and a very pleading tone. And when this is the physical part of it. Now when this is happening on stage, there is, because you're having a discourse within yourself as well. You feel as if there are if I was in a situation, I would not behave this way. I would be in control of my senses. I would be in control of my voice. So you're having that discourse with yourself in real time, and you feel like there are certain truths that are coming onto the surface because of this performance. I would not have thought about myself that way had it been not for these actors, for this delivery. Sounds dialogue is just one example of it. The heightened reality part is also achieved by extreme light. The light is supposed to, because you're sitting at the very center of the auditorium, so the light is coming from places where you would not expect it to come out of, and you feel as if you are, like, you find yourself in a very uncomfortable position, and so you feel like this is not how reality is supposed to function. So you come to know yourself a bit more. So heightened reality is not just a more superior degree to the standard reality. No, heightened reality is actually distorted reality. Do you get it?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Of course. Any other questions?
Ma'am, there's one. It's not too loud, but so can we, can we say that like hyperbole is a part of the theater of cruelty?
We can say that. See, Adila, hyperbole is like, it's like, for example, Pramiti, Adila, Fatma, and Srijan. You all practice the theater of cruelty. All right. Srijan thought that my signature style would be, since we are all part of the one movement, you need to have something that is very unique to you, so that I would come to watch Adila's play, but I would also come to watch Srijan's play and Fatma's play and Pramiti's play. So Srijan would think that I would pick a theme that is unique to me, a technique that is unique to me. So I would use puppets that are not like puppets where they're very oversized. One you can see in the infographic, or puppets that do not look like puppets. Fatma may think that, okay, I would talk more about, because we are not concerned with dialogue, so I would, there would only be crying or only wailing, only whimpering. Even if the person wants to express happiness, they would be crying. That becomes my style. Adila might think that, yes, I want to use hyperbole. So that can be my technique, but not in dialogue, in delivery. So, yes, hyperbole is not a theme, it is more like a technique, but not of the dialogue, of the delivery. Clear?
Okay, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Any other questions if you have? You can also drop a question over text to me if you feel like when you go through these slides again, when you read the work and you feel like there's something you need to have a discussion about. You all have my number, and if you don't, you can get from Adila, or Adila can pass on the doubt to me. So I hope this was a helpful session, that you got to learn something. Something that you've not learned about the theater of cruelty, about drama in general, especially about the actor-audience relationship. All right, Fatma. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everyone. That was the lecture.
Thank you so much, ma'am. It was a really wonderful lecture and really interesting too. And please allow me to, I would like to invite Nidhi now for the vote of thanks.
Good afternoon, ma'am. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Nidhi Bandre, and on the behalf of all the students, I would like to express my heartfelt gratitude to Miss Moulshree Saxena, ma'am, for conducting such an insightful and engaging online lecture for NET exam preparation. The clarity with which you explain the concepts, the examples, and the time you took to address our doubts have inspired us to prepare with more confidence and enthusiasm. We understand the challenges of organizing and delivering online lectures, but your seamless execution made it feel just as impactful as an in person class. And we truly appreciate the time, effort, and preparation you put into this session. Also, we look forward to having more such interactive and enriching online sessions with you in the future, ma'am. Once again, thank you so much, dear ma'am, for sharing your expertise with us, and we eagerly anticipate more opportunities to learn under your mentorship. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nidhi. Thank you for such wonderful words, and thank you, everyone, for being a part of this. I hope to see you soon.